Hi, my name is Arturo O'Farrill, and I'm the artistic director and founder of the Afro Latin Jazz Orchestra and the Afro Latin Jazz Alliance, and I welcome you to La Plaza Fridays, part of ALJA's Digital Village. Today is a very special edition of Digital Village. It features a conversation that I had with none other than the good Dr. Cornel West, who's one of our most outspoken and foundational leaders and thinkers in society. And of course he's polarizing because prophets always go without honor in their own country. He says hard things that we all need to hear. Whether you agree with them or not, Dr. West is truly a revolutionary thinker. So you're going to see a conversation, but what I did want to tell you is that we had that conversation as a result of a project that we did together called the Cornel West Concerto, which was commissioned by the Apollo Theater, the People's Performing Arts Center, that I wrote on the McDowell residency. And it's a piece that deals with the four questions that W.E.B. Du Bois poses in his seminal work, The Souls of Black Folk. And the really amazing thing, I could not have predicted this if you asked me 1,000 times. I just would not have seen this coming. We just won a Grammy Award for a recording of a performance of Dr. West and Arturo O'Farrill performing the four questions. So I think this is a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you come back and visit us regularly in all our digital programming. We just celebrated Carla Bley. We have our virtual Birdland week 50 on Sunday, and we invite you to come and be a part of our lives. Thank you very much.
I want to start by putting this up. This is what the world needs to see, because this is one of the towering artistic geniuses and spiritual giants of his generation. And I have been blessed to work with him now. It's been over 5 years that we go back. We had the Apollo in 2016, Birdland in January 2017, Bethesda, Maryland, Brooklyn College on the stage. I mean, we've just been all over. But this is what folk need to see, because we are in such a multi-layered crisis, and we need quality artists and quality music. And that's what you had in the Afro Latin Jazz Orchestra, the four questions. But also Steel Small Voice, Jazz Twins. I mean, we got the whole album, the whole CD, all of the tracks in that regard. And I just want folk to be able to see what it looks like. That's my brother working on the piano with heart, mind, and soul.
Yeah, that my wife doesn't like that picture that much, though.
Is that right?
she thinks I'm in pain in that picture. But you don't understand.
The magnificent piano player herself. She said, "Oh Lord, my loved one is in pain. He's in." I said, "Well, that's his monk moment. He's got his monk moment working."
Let me tell you something, Cornel. You inspired the greatest work of my life. Ooh. You brought me to a point where I connected with something so profoundly necessary that I know was part of just seeing you speak so eloquently to the reality of human suffering and the reality of the inherent situation that we're facing in the United States. And when I saw you speak, I saw that Seattle Town Hall video on YouTube. And then I saw you at the Riverside Church.
Yes.
Bob Avakian.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege of marching with you at Union Square, and one of the most profoundly deep moments of my life, besides when I first heard that Seattle Town Hall speech you made, was seeing you speak. I don't know if you remember, you were suffering from a cold or a flu, but when you spoke that night at that police brutality gathering on a church at 86th Street and West End Avenue.
I remember that.
And you spoke, and I will never forget. You almost collapsed on stage, as I recall. As I recall, you were not feeling well,
That's
and
true.
there was a moment where you were speaking to the brutal murders that were taking place and that are still taking place.
Yeah.
And you spoke
Yeah.
and there was so much emotion and power in what you were saying that you nearly fell off the dais. And it reminded me so much of what life is about. And life is about truth telling and being a journalist and speaking to the the evil, and so I'm a musician and I appreciate the beauty of your words, but musicians need people like you to inspire and feed us so that we can. This is podcast or whatever. I'm telling you from my heart, you changed my world in such a powerful way that I will forever and forever in my life be grateful that that God brought you into my path. I just can't thank him enough, and I can't thank you enough for giving voice to something in me that had to be birthed.
Well, my brothers, no, I feel that, brother, and I embrace that. The beautiful thing is that once we came together right there in Manhattan School of Music, stole away in one of the rooms, reflected on the music you had written, you started playing on the piano, giving a sense of what it was going to be like. Then we came up with the 4 questions from the great W.B. Du Bois himself. How shall integrity face oppression? What does honesty do in the face of deception? What does decency do in the face of unbelievable lies and mendacity? And then how does courage meet brute force? Wrestling with those, I said to myself, my brother Arturo is on the same vibration as myself. Our souls commune at the deepest level. So in that sense, it really hits the level of just being human, because you got the great artists on the one hand, and then you got my writing and scholarly investigations on the other. But coming together, your artistic genius lifts me up, and my own gifts tried to go up with you. And it's been just a ride of a lifetime, man. It's the ride of a lifetime. That's why every time we get together, we just know we have a great time. We have a good time. We have fun. We laugh. We cry. We wrestle. We talk about what we've been reading, what we've been listening to, and so forth. And it doesn't get better than that, man. It just doesn't.
No, it's really funny. It's funny. I remember being very meticulous in my planning and being very careful and cautious and saying, I don't want to upset Dr. West, so I'm going to be really well prepared. And I wrote down every nuance and cadence of your voice. And I sent you a practice tape. Remember that? I sent you a practice tape, and it actually had a sample of your speech.
Yes.
And it had the sample going up and down in cadence along with the horns. And then I realized, wait a second, that's like telling John Coltrane what notes to play. That's like telling John Coltrane what notes to play. And then the most beautiful, miraculous thing that happened was that you completely improvised and did the thing you do, but somehow in the capturing of the writing of the transcription of the exact note and cadence and rhythm of the speech from 2004, somehow the energy of that moment and the energy of the new moment came together, and I felt like it actually was better. It was better than what I had created. It was better because it came from a new friendship, a new moment, a new experience, and you just, you are the John Coltrane of oratory.
Well, brother, if you want to leave a brother speechless, you just mentioned Coltrane in front of me, and I ain't got nothing else to say because I know we're all so far short. But the beautiful thing is, and this is true for you, it's true for your magnificent family, was the musicality, but also the spirituality that shot through, is that I think both of us are so deeply immersed in and committed to the best of the traditions that are shot through us. Yeah. So that each and every time we get a chance to get together, we just know that, you know, I met your beloved mother.
Wow.
Never forget her.
I forgot that.
Oh,
wow.
Oh, yes, I did.
Cornel, I forgot that. You know that she passed.
I know, because when we got together right after that, we talked about that. You know, we had prayer and things. Your mother's all through you, giving her unbelievable excellence of spirit and mind and soul. And then Chico himself, of course, we have no language for his genius in that regard. But then he's so tied to Dizzy too. Because after a while, no Dizzy without Chico, no Chico without Dizzy. And then it goes on, and it's through, of course. You working with Harry Belafonte.
I gotta tell you. I gotta tell you a funny story, man. This is how deep that ancestral lineage is. This is how deep the spirits are. This is how deep we commune with the reality of the spirit world. My mother, the last year of her life, suffered great dementia, and she was very ill. But periodically, she'd look up at me and she'd say, "Mijito, how do you like living in Los Angeles?" And I'd look at her and I'd say, "Mom, I don't live in Los Angeles. What are you talking about?" And, you know, because her dementia is like, she'd go, "Mijito, how do you like living in Los Angeles?" I think she made this happen. I think she wanted me to be near my sister. And I think she knew you.
See you at UCLA, right?
Well, I think she knew you. I think she hugged you from a distance and saw you as if she'd known you her whole life. And that's how she was a witchy woman, man. She had that spirit. She had
deep spirit, man.
Connection. Like you don't even know how those things are. But I remember when she met you. That was
she had that goldenness in her soul, though.
You'd been one of the folks that she'd been knowing for years, because she had parties. I never even told you that she used to have these parties with my father, and they'd have Dizzy Gillespie and Mario Balsa and Jerry Mulligan and John Hendricks. These are the people that would go to my house and hang out.
Wow, just hanging out.
And let me tell you something. They weren't there for Chico. They were there for Lupe's chicken mole.
I understand, my brother.
They were there for the chicken mole. Plus, my mother had a way of making everybody feel loved. She really did.
No, but it's just nothing like it. It's very interesting, man. I had a wonderful dialogue with AOC. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I started off talking about Rafael Hernandez, Precioso, and El Lamento, Porqueño, and Pedro Flores.
Wow.
And she started reflecting on the rich Puerto Rican connection, which we know is inseparable from Cuba, inseparable from Mexico. It becomes inseparable from Harlem.
I was going to say inseparable from Harlem.
Boricos, the great poet herself, there in Harlem. And I'm here at Harvard, of course. We talk about Albizo's Campos, graduated #1 in his class, 1921.
That's correct.
They wouldn't allow him to speak. They were racist professors, but he was a black Puerto Rican, brilliant, speaking 6 languages, 2 classical languages he knew, and then would go back to Puerto Rico and lead the independence movement, but always tied also to the artists and the musicians and the poets. See, all of that in AOC, connected to Arturo, connected to Brother West, bringing us together at this deep human, spiritual, moral, and political level. You say, ooh, boy, it's just a blessing to be alive, even in a moment of the pandemic, even given the neo-fascist gangster in the White House, even given depression-like levels of unemployment and mass unemployment, shutting down educational systems and what have you. We need music, the arts, the spirit more than ever.
Yeah, no, I know, and I'm trying to.
Well, brother,
trying to
you
really,
you doing well. This is more than trying, y'all. This is more than trying. This is the real thing. Tell it.
But here's the other thing too: is I'm thinking about like how many brilliant young people need to be told that they can speak to truth, that they can join that club, that they can join the Bisu Compost Club, that they can be a part of greatness if they don't listen to the door being slammed in their face. Because what I'm finding out. That's why I love teaching and educating, is because sometimes it's not about teaching or educating. It's about giving license, telling somebody in their soul and their spirit, you go. Don't let anybody hold you back. You don't stop no matter what. You know, I never met AOC. I never met her, but I
Oh no, you're gonna get a
wonderful
chance to meet
warrior.
her. No, you're
What a
gonna get a
wonderful
chance
warrior.
to meet her and bring her together in that way. I mean, I was thinking of Brother Robin D.G. Kelly, distinguished, towering intellectual professor at UCLA too.
That's right. He was on my search committee. He wrote that incredible. Yes. He wrote that incredible book. One of my favorite jazz books. Yeah, the Monk book is phenomenal. Because you felt like you knew him.
Magisterial, master. Well, you might remember at the very end of that, when he starts off that text talking to Monk, always used to say, "Always know," and you don't know whether he's saying ALWAYS or whether he's saying ALALL.
Yeah.
YAYS. No.
Right.
So you know in all the different ways, and you're always knowing. But then he ends the text of Monk used to always say, play yourself. Play yourself. He learned that from James the Lion Smith. He learned that from Johnson. Was it James? Is it James P. Johnson?
James P. Johnson. James P. Johnson.
James P. Johnson. I think it's Willie the Lion, though, isn't it?
Oh, Willie the Lion Smith.
I'm thinking he learned from Willie the Lion Smith and James P. Johnson and the others. Play yourself, Theolonius. Play yourself, Monk. Don't be imitating Art Tatum. Don't be imitating the others. Find your own voice. That's that licensing that you have done throughout your teaching. And you've been distinguished professor in a lot of different places, going all the way back to UMass, though. Is that right?
That's right. I was at UMass, and that's a beautiful program that had Max
That
Roach.
was a historic.
Max Roach, Abby Lincoln. I mean, that. Wow. My God, that's and you know what's funny? Here's something that's really interesting. That program was born at the African American Studies Department. It's part of the same. It was actually not a music department at first, and it was really wonderful to me to not separate those strands.
Right.
Because I think sometimes in the conservatory model we get very partisan. This is classical. This is jazz. This is, and to me, it's a complete construct. You know, the social moment in history is
all
inextricably intertwined with what's happened in music.
It's like he married Baraka's blues people. He wrote it under the name of Leroy Jones, 1963. It's the history of Black people, the history of the Black freedom struggle, music at the center.
But let me ask you a question. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said this, brother, because I've been meaning to ask you this for a long time. So how come most music institutions don't want to deal with the art ensemble? How come they don't want to deal with Chicago School? How come most jazz institutions don't want to deal with the real truth of what jazz is and where it comes from and where it's going? I mean, I'm just curious if you haven't. Can't wait to hear your answer on this
question. You know, our dear brother Javon Jackson out in Hartford, University of Hartford, had me out there a couple of years ago. We had a rich dialogue, and that was one of the things we were wrestling with. Because, I mean, the truth is that the truth is too much for most universities. It's too much, man. They can't take it. They can't take it. I mean, I talk about it all the time at Harvard. The motto of Harvard is veritas, right? That's Latin for truth. Right. And the condition of truth, one condition of truth allows suffering to speak.
That's correct.
Now, how much suffering can Harvard really take? Are they going to really hear the suffering of indigenous people? They're going to really hear the suffering of what they did to our precious Mexican people way back in the 1840s? Are they really really gonna come to terms with Black people suffering for 400? Are they really gonna come to terms with what the Jewish folk had to deal with in terms of being spit on and rebuked, even in the United States? We ain't even talking about Germany. Are they really gonna come to terms with the Arabs and the Muslims and the Palestinians and the Dalit peoples and the Roman so-called Gypsy and the peasants? I mean, so that formalized education is only going to get snippets and dimensions of the truth. But the thing about the artists, and especially when it comes to Black music, and especially when it comes to some of the most powerful forms of Black music, like what was happening in Chicago with Braxton and others. Ooh, Sun Ra, free jazz, Coltrane, Eric Dolphy. Are they really gonna come to terms with Alice Coltrane's trans-Western, Eastern, Detroit-oriented genius in her music? That's too much for the Academy, man. So that you say to the Academy, okay, we know you're trying.
Right.
We appreciate the effort. We don't keep pushing you. But we know you're not ready. You're not ready.
Oh my God, that's a big struggle, man. I'm telling you, from the world, man. You know this better than anybody else. We, especially in this moment, and we are demanding that the culture of canonization be re-examined so it doesn't reflect strictly Eurocentric values. Not just the culture of music, but the culture of learning. The history and the canon of learning is completely skewed. We see everything as it. We examine, especially in the arts, but in general, in life, in institutional construction and artifice, we look at things as if they were invented by white European males. And unfortunately, India got something to say about that. India was around thousands of years before,
prior to
the Aztecs,
the great notion of Europe itself. No, that's true.
And
it's
so, so it's
true.
really interesting because in this moment, in this Black Lives moment, when finally society took notice of the fact that Black young men were being murdered at an alarming rate by a police state. This was an unbelievable moment of reckoning for this nation, because it's been happening. It's been happening. It's been happening. And the moment that we start asking why, we need to look at the very tenets upon which racism is built, and nobody wants to talk about this, but the very idea of racism is born in Eurocentric academia culturalization.
In the modern world, that is so very, very true. But let me ask you this question, though, because I was thinking of those marvelous times, and we still deeply engaged now, but those marvelous times you and I were marching with Brother Carl Dix, and,
of course,
Brother Jim and Fredros and others, that the role of jazz and all of its various forms, the Max Roach's Freedom Suite in Alabama by Coltrane. It could be the unbelievable power in the music of a Mary Lou Williams or a Jerry Allen. Where do you think jazz is now relative to these kind of political issues? I know Brother Terrence has been strong on this, and of course I've worked with him. I've been blessed to work with him as well. But you have to acknowledge that you right there on the border, making an album on the border, to make sure that our precious Mexican brothers and sisters are not being violated, mistreated, and demeaned and devalued. Then you're with me talking about Du Bois, the Apollo. You know what I mean? You're talking about the ecological crisis. You come out on Trump very explicitly. I don't know too many jazz musicians who have been as vocal for so long about not just Trump, but about neo-fascist elements before Trump. How do you understand where jazz is in relation to politics, and then where you are inside of jazz in relation to politics, though, brother? I
mean, I got to tell you, there was a turning point in my life. I think I spoke to you on this one day. There was a young man by the name of Ramarley Graham who was shot down by the NYPD in the Bronx, and he was 19 at the time, and my youngest was 19 at the time. And it was just such a crystallization of the realization that not only was this nation inherently skewed socioeconomically, but you don't want to admit that blanket hatred and racism of people of color is a guiding principle of what holds society together. That's a harsh thing to say.
Right.
But I watched that event take place, and I watched there was a videotape of the officer leaving grandmother's house, and he's chuckling. He's laughing. He just killed a young man who had nothing in his possession, no guns, no drugs, in full view of his grandmother and brother. And he's laughing, and something clicked in me, and I said, I can no longer, my life is no longer my own. So I kind of thought about the fact that, well, I've been having a career because I fell in love with Herbie Hancock, fell in love with Miles Davis. I've been having a career because I wanted to play the piano. I want to play this music that sets my soul free. I wanted to understand African rhythmic code. And all those things are meaningless unless you tie them to communication to others. And so at some point, something happened in me that said, I don't care if you're playing Sophisticated Lady. I don't care if you're playing Take the A Train. There has to be a knowledge of where the music comes from. Isfahan. There has to be a knowledge of where this music, what it was created under, the conditions under which musicians lived and live today. If you've never seen a stockade, if you've never seen a slave, man, don't be telling me that this is not revolutionary music. Don't be telling me that this is just music to affirm your nationalism by. It's not. It's not anything. Jazz, the spirit of jazz has always been to overcome, this is what you taught me. The spirit of jazz has always been to return love for hatred and oppression. And that's a sacred thing. And so I don't think it's a comfortable thing. And I mean, I'm Irish, Mexican, Cuban, German. My wife is African-American, Jewish, Native American. So, I mean, I'm in a very, very funny position because I see things from a lot of different vistas. And for me, the one thing that rings true is that as a jazz musician, whatever your background is, your job is to stand on the shoulders of giants. And don't nostalgia. It's not a nostalgic moment. It's not a replication moment. It's a moment of realizing that actually they suffered greatly to bring us this love. Suffered greatly to bring us this love and this divine message. And so, I don't know what it is, but I think a lot of times, sometimes jazz is caught up in the moment of kind of it's also a business, it's also an industry, it's also it's also an institutional business, it's an education world, it's a printing world, it's a selling units world. But I think at the end of the day, the people who really are going to make great art are the people who remember why we're here, who brought us to this point. And so I really do. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Every time I sit at the piano, every time I sit at my writing desk, I try to remember that there's a message. There's a message that is political, that is social, and even if it makes people uncomfortable, even if it gets you disinvited from some festivals and some institutions, even if it means your career is this and no more or no less or no more, those things are secondary to the idea that, man, Miles Davis got beat up outside Birdland. They didn't believe he was there to play. The cops came up to him. He was smoking a cigarette, and he pointed to his image on the marquee, and they still beat him up and took him away. That stuff is and so again, you talk about you talk about the Mexicans at the border, the Mexicans that have been lynched. They were lynched in Mexico, in Texas, in New Mexico, and California. But we speak to the human condition that is perverted. It's a perverted condition where the powerful are always taking advantage of the weak, and that just motivates me to make my voice heard.
No, brother, that's what you do, and that's what situates and locates you. Right.
Yeah, but I remember that rally.
Center of the best tradition. See, I think that the Black musical tradition is the greatest tradition of spiritual fortitude and artistic creativity in the face of such sustained and chronic catastrophe.
Yes, sir.
And what I mean by that is I don't think it's biological. I don't think it's genetic, but rather it is when you take a people and strip them from their rich civilizations and attempt to convince them that they are less than human every day, both to exploit their labor, but also to make sure their bodies are viewed with abomination, make sure their beauty, their intelligence, and their morality is always viewed as less than, and try to get them to consent to it. And the only thing left for them is music. They have no land, they have no property, they have no rights, they have no liberties. The only thing left is to raise their voices, to lift their voices with the anthem of Black folk. And it becomes then an all-embracing tradition that says, whosoever will, let them come, whatever color you are, Bex, Biderbeck, white middle-class brother from Iowa, come on, sit at the feet of Louis Armstrong, you're gonna learn something. Bill Evans, come on, Bill, whoever it is, you know what I mean?
But you know that famous quote, Bill Evans?
Keep the status high. You got Art Tatum gonna be staring at you. Oscar Peterson, track of them. You know what I mean?
Oh man.
All of them ain't gonna forget about you. They gonna set some standards now. And yet at the same time, it says too that it's always already hybrid. Right. You see, because when you talk about Black in the New World, you're already talking about indigenous people. You're already talking about the Spanish, the British, all tied together, just like myself. Like the color of my skin is both a history of the raping of Black women. It's a history of the interaction with the Europeans and others. It's a history of the Black folk who came from Western Africa, but then themselves connected with other kinds of Africans who were part of the West African civilization. All of that hybridity, all of that cross-cultural fertilization taking place, and the fundamental expression of the human spirit will be in the music at its highest level. So when Sun Ra say, Black folk have tried everything possible, we need to try the impossible. Come with me on the mothership. And that's before George Clinton. That's before Bootsy. That's before Betty Davis, the wife of Miles Davis, who was the funk master in her own way, right? Coming out of
Sun Ra, man, Sun Ra.
Sun Ra gonna say, hey, you're this genius from Alabama. Say, hey, come with me. We're gonna give you a sense of the impossible. For 2 hours, we're gonna take you somewhere you ain't never been before, and you'll always remember you were there.
It's funny too, because you know what? I love this one quote that was attributed to Bill Evans. He mentioned Bill Evans. Somebody asked him what he thought jazz was. And he said, jazz is not a what, but a how. And so what you're speaking to is the part of humanity that responds in love. Because and I think you said something really interesting too about why it's also something. There's a message in Randy Weston, Randy Weston.
Oh, the great Weston. God bless his soul.
Baba Randy was a huge source of nutrition for my life and a huge source of change. And he said to me, "There's Africa has a message for the future," and he, you know, what he basically understood to be the music, the central music of our soul, comes from the African shores. It comes from the West African shores of Morocco. The basic nutritional code of all music is Moroccan. that rhythm that becomes syncopated swing, that rhythm that becomes the ride cymbal, boom, ding, boom, ding, that's a shaman music from Morocco, and Randy said, if you want to find yourself, he's speaking this to Irish, German, Mexican, Cuban, Arturo. He says, if you want to find yourself, go to your roots in Africa. You know, and I haven't had the blessing to go. I have not had the blessing.
Well, you've already been there in a lot of different kind of ways, brother. You might not have been there physically and geographically yet, but there's a lot of different ways. Marcus Garvey never got to Africa, but that brother went to Africa every day.
Yeah.
His own mind, his spirit, his psyche, and what have you. You know what I mean? But you remember what Miles said? They asked Miles, what is jazz? He said, jazz is Louis Armstrong and Charlie Parker. That's jazz. And of course, what he was saying there was that it's the exemplary figures. He could have said Sarah Vaughan. He could have said Carmen McRae. He could have said Billie Holiday. He could have said Dinah Washington. He could have said so many individuals, because jazz is the rich individuality in the human that all of us have. But it has to be enacted through tremendous courage and vision and mastery of craft and technique. And you see it exemplified in persons who have distinctive voices. You know what I mean? So everybody gonna sound, Clifford Brown is gonna sound different than Clark Terry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but check this out. You just said such a mouthful, because jazz is the first music in the history of civilization that was defined as a high art because of the individual practicing it. Before that, it was the composer. Before that, it was the medium. Before that, it was this, it was that. It was any number of things. But for the first time ever in the history of civilization, it is the individual human being speaking through themselves and their instrument and their experience that actually becomes the master artist. And I think that's really huge. But you said it perfectly. It's like that jazz is that voice. And that's why you can't become a cog. You can't become a product of an education. You can't become a product of a society. You can't become a product of a commodification. If you're going to be a jazz musician, your biggest struggle is not to learn 2-5-1s or the latest riff from Cannibal Adderley. Your job is not to transcribe necessarily. Your job is to look and find the struggle inside of yourself that really says, I have worth. As you said earlier, I have worth. I don't take my worth from your definition of myself. I have worth, and I deserve. No, not deserve. I have worth, but I have the privilege of establishing that worth in and of myself, not because you define me. You know, and I think that's a struggle that's where the struggle becomes global and human. That's where it becomes.
Absolutely.
And the oppressed people of the African race are the people that have shown us that lesson most clearly, because everything that white European, American, colonialist, imperialistic empires tried to do was stamp that individually out of the individual. And that's why jazz to me is, I'm telling you, did I ever tell you how I became a jazz musician?
No.
I was a good little boy, man. I was Chico Farrell's son. I was practicing Bach and Beethoven and Mozart. And my mother and father, I listened to Elton John on the radio. Was I just doing what I was told?
Well, you had gone to Manhattan School of Music.
I was going, but this was before Manhattan.
Well, this was before. Okay.
My mother and father had a lock and key on their record collection.
Ooh, interesting.
My mother and father had a lock and key on their record collection. And I was, the best way to get a kid to break into anything is to put a lock and key on it.
Put a lock on it.
So one day they were out, and I snuck into the living room, and I picked that lock apart. And I just took the first record out, and then Miles Davis was on the cover.
Ooh.
And Miles Davis had this look on his face like I couldn't figure it out. There was so much, his face was just this impenetrable statue of meaning and purpose. Like I saw purpose in that face.
Right.
And I put on 7 Steps to Heaven.
Ooh.
7 Steps to Heaven with George Coleman and Herbie and Ron and Tony. And the first solo out of the gate is George Coleman, I think. And when he started to play, man, I literally found my center. I said, this is, I was almost like the skies opened up and the angels spoke to me and the light shone down. I had a literal epiphany.
Wow.
And I
Now, how old were you though, brother?
I think I was 10,
Oh,
11,
you that young?
like that.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, and literally, I don't remember the words I used, but what I came up with was, if you can learn to play music like this, you will be free. That was so I literally,
freedom.
yeah, I literally, and it had, you know, man, it had nothing to do with girls or drugs or getting famous or winning awards. It had to do with, if you can play music like this, you will be free. Now, that's a heavy lesson.
That is profound, though. But it doesn't get it doesn't get that much better in the short time we have between womb and tomb, though, man.
Yeah.
That at the very core of our mortality is this sense of trying to somehow respond to our call for help, because we all have a death sentence in space and time. And we wonder why it is that we've been thrown into this space and time. And did we do something that warrant this suffering that's coming our way? Or how do you make sense of all of the overwhelming misery in the world, and also the joy that you, what are the structures of feeling and value that generate any sense of mission and purpose in the world? And you say, well, the freedom becomes, it's going to be as much in the process as it's going to be in the product. It's going to be as much in how you go about it, back to Bill Evans, as opposed to where you actually end up in your destination. And once you accept that, then that's where the love is. Radical love in freedom, radical freedom in love, because first you got to learn how to be invincible and vulnerable. So you play the piano and you start listening to Art Tatum and you say, I'm humbled for life.
Oh, yeah.
I'm humbled for life.
But
I want to be the greatest piano. Monk used to say, I want to be the greatest musician who ever lived. Then he listened to Art Tatum. He said, but I'm going to start imitating Art Tatum to see how I learned how to play the piano. So you got that vulnerability, invincibility, and humility, but then your tenacity sets in, see. Oh, yes. You become a warrior of the spirit, see.
You know, I always look at life as Art Tatum and everything else afterwards. And it's funny because it doesn't
say God just walked in. Art Tatum.
That's right. And it's one of those things where it's one of the things where you can't look at Art Tatum and go, wow, I wish I could do that, because you know, in 1,000 lifetimes you'll never be able to.
Exactly. You're gonna be humble for life, man.
But that's the coolness of it. That's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty of Monk, because somewhere between Monk and Tatum is the meeting place of the two. Somewhere between prodigious pyrotechnical genius and sheer poetic inspiration is always a huge playing field. And so you don't have to feel like I'm never going to be as deep as Monk, or I'm never going to be as great as Tatum. You have to go, wow, those guys set a huge, huge playground for me to play in. That's a huge sandbox.
Right.
You know, I don't need to fight anybody else to find my place in the sandbox, because it's huge.
That's crucial. That's crucial.
Huge. You know,
so all the little petty competition, you can push it aside and see, let's find out what's inside of you. Play yourself, as Monk used.
That's right. And you know, and people do that though. People get very territorial and competitive.
No, because the human beings are going to be human beings. I mean, when the freedom that you talked about at 10 years old is always going to be over against a whole lot of mess. It's going to be over against domination, oppression, envy, resentment, insecurity, anxiety, fears, all the things that go into what it is to be human when you look at our history. But all of that still doesn't fully exhaust that quest for freedom that you experienced when you heard Miles's group, you see.
Well,
that's true. It's true for Beethoven. It's true for Mozart. You know, it's true for Aretha. It's true for Celia Cruz. It's true for Tito Puente. I mean, it's a human thing. But in the United States, in the U.S. empire, ooh, you better go on back to some Robert Johnson. You better go on back to some Maura Rainey. Gonna tell you about how Black Bottom and gonna talk you some Prove It To Me blues.
Right.
Whoa, that might be a little bit too funky for me. Then get on out of here. Then you're not ready.
Right.
Get on out.
Exactly.
You conform it still. You know,
exactly.
We're looking for folks who willing to let it out, give, empty, donate yourself. Lord, it takes a lot of courage to do that.
There's a lot of funk in there, man. It's funky, man. I love what you say about when you become worm food, man. If you don't see that, you lost, man. You know, we all gonna become worm food.
That's what's going on here. I'm telling you that right now. Anytime we get a chance to get together, which we did on this record, all of what we talking about is overflowing. Remember Larry Graham used to talk about in Slide in the Family songs, a song called Sing a Simple Song. Sing a Simple Song. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he's, I'm loving, over loving. I see, that's a deep formulation, man.
Yeah.
Because it's not just love, you over loving. You see, that love is so overflowing. It's like the caravan of love of the Isley brothers, or the love train of the OJs. It's over loving. Even though folk are over hating, you over loving. Not just to be coming back, because that's the way you choose to be in the world. With style, smile.
That's a hard lesson, Dr. West.
And a smile and a grin. That's how I choose to be. Gone with your petty hatred. Gone with your white supremacist lies. Gone with all of these, your subservience to the idols of the world. Hey,
right.
I'm Jimmy Jones.
You dig?
I'm Sally Mae Smith. You know what I mean? I'm Juanita Rodriguez. Hey, what you gonna do with that?
That's right, brother. That's right. Larry Graham. Larry Graham is a school.
Oh man, Larry's something else, man. He's underrated.
So sly. No, not to Marcus Miller. He ain't underrated.
Well, no, that's true. That's true. But even his relation to Prince, you know, I used to go spend the time with Prince at Paisley Park, and we traveled all over to Montreux and so forth. And Larry was always with him. They were like white on rice, like wet on water, man.
True stories, man. True stories, man. I used to play in this club called Nell's on 14th Street. And it was one of those places that had the bouncer and the whole velvet rope, and the young and the beautiful went there. And we had a gig playing. I was in a band called the Lucky Seven, which was a kind of a Latin salsa band. Ooh. And one day we was playing, and Prince walked in.
Huh?
Prince walked in. I'll never forget this as long as I live. He was like mad cool, bro. He had a posse, and he had beautiful ladies, beautiful men. And he walked in with like 20, 30 people, and he went and he sat in the corner. Check this out, bro. He went and sat in the corner, and he listened. He sat there like this, listening to the music. He had a drink, and he didn't say a word. He just sat there listening. And all his people were respectful and just no vibe. They just were grooving on the music. Same club, another time period. The Donald walked in. The Donald walked in, and he had a posse. Long, tall people, big, huge men. And they came in, and they were screaming and yelling, and we couldn't play. And it was grandstanding and casting vibes. And I was young. We had no idea. I mean, I knew who Prince was, but we had no idea who he was going to become. But what I learned was that message is so beautiful, that quietude, that respect, and that beauty was. So when Prince walked in the club, you knew it.
That's right. That's right.
Because of the quietude. You knew it because of the dignity and the elegance.
Yeah,
you didn't have to come in with 6 goons and screaming and yelling and flashing money. You didn't have to do that. And that was a lesson that always struck me, that you can be gentle. And, apparently I never met Prince, but he didn't do a lot of yelling.
Oh, no. Nobody ever saw him sleep, man. I'd be on the plane with Prince all night. I try to steal away for 2 hours just to get a nap, and he's still up there just writing lyrics and stuff.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Hey, brother, you got to get sleep some way. When it comes, it comes, my brother. When it comes, it comes. It's like that sense of calling, vocation, mission, purpose.
Mindfulness,
concentration, single-mindedness, but most importantly, self-confidence, inner security. Even as you're restless, you still have a security in yourself, and yet you're incomplete. You're unfinished.
Right.
You're still trying to get up to be as good as and the best that you can be. And for him, the best in the world, just like Muhammad Ali or anybody else. Fred Astaire was like that in dancing. I'm going to learn from the Nicholas brothers. I'm going to learn from Bojangles. I want to be the deepest dancer ever. So when Michael Jackson comes along, he's going to study Fred Astaire, but he's going to start off with James Brown.
Yeah.
James coming out of Gary, Indiana.
Hey, man.
Urban space. You see James Brown going to be the model, but then he said, wait, but shoot, I want all these different kind of folk who can move their feet in a rhythmic way in such a way to touch the soul of other folk. And then Savion Glover, oh Lord, have mercy. You talking about genius, artistic genius, and that brother, man. But he understands the same thing from Gregory Hines and the others, Sammy Davis and others. All part of the same tradition.
There was a Radcliffe artist in residence who I had the privilege of working with for a week at the Joyce and have shared many a platform with. Did you get to meet Ayodele Cassell?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
No.
I got a surprise for you. Ayodele Cassell is a young black Afro Latina from Puerto Rico who was in Savion's show. She was in Savion's show.
Really?
And she was an artist in residence at Radcliffe, and she's been around, but she's one of the most unbelievably gifted, like you, gifted jazz musicians I've ever met. But she don't play the saxophone. She dances.
Yes.
And it's amazing to me because meeting somebody like you and meeting somebody like Ayodele is realizing that being a great jazz musician doesn't have anything to do with playing an instrument. It has to do with understanding that you are that individual that has overcome, and not only that, but that you have created that vehicle that you ride. You're not, you know what I'm saying? Like you're an intellect. You're professor of divinity, and I mean you the learnedness of a Cornel West is staggering to me. I mean you probably read 3 books a day, man, and then write 3 more.
Well, no.
I can't even begin to think of what it's like to live in your mind. The mind of the
I'm
intellect.
listening to Curtis Mayfield at least a half hour a day, and then stealing away to reading a little Kafka and Shakespeare, and
Kafka, Dostoevsky. Man, I know what you hang out. You hang out with them Russian brothers. I know that. Prince Mishkin, bro. I thought this was all adventure story, man. I didn't realize it was so deep. But that's the thing, is like the spirit of jazz, the spirit of improv, the spirit of listening deeply to the ancestor's voice in your blood, in your heart, in your soul, and speaking forth truth based on, I mean it with all my heart. Somehow that is what defines a real jazz man. Listening deeply to the voice inside of you.
Yeah, see, that's so important. The faculty of receptivity, to cultivate something inside of us that allows us to listen in a certain kind of way. Because I mean, art is always trying to get us to see things other people don't see, and feel things more deeply than other people feel, and then to more courageously love and serve and act, but also to be able to listen to things other people don't really listen to. You see what I mean? And listen to things people think are beyond listening. People used to say, well, talent is being able to hit the bullseye every time, and genius is the ability to hit the bullseye nobody else can see. Well, in a way, too, that means you got to be able to hear some things other people not hearing, So you then take it in and transfigure it through your creativity and suffering and talent to give the world something that's new. That's original.
So beautiful, man.
This is what we tell the young brothers and sisters all the time. Be originals. You know, don't be no copy. Everybody's an echo rather than a voice. You see, you can be successful in the world by being an echo, but you're not going to be great because you're going to define your sense of who you are and be an original. And all of the figures we talked about. We could talk about Donny Hathaway. We could talk about Barry White.
Yeah.
You know, we could talk about Reggie Calloway and Teddy Pendergrass and so forth. They were originals in their own distinctive ways. Gladys Knight, Phyllis Hyman. And see, we haven't even got into the Delphonics Dramatics and the whispers and the main ingredient, enchantment and
wow.
You know,
how about the Manhattans?
The Manhattans was
nobody talks about the Manhattans, man.
Oh, I'm losing you. Somebody listen to I'm Losing You Tonight by the Manhattans. Oh my.
Oh yeah, that was my hang, the Manhattans.
Oh man, they from Jersey City.
Wow. That's
they named after Manhattan, but
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, they right across the river.
But I bet they weren't part of the Bridge and Tunnel crowd, man. They had their own.
Yeah, no, they had their own thing, no brother.
They
had their own. But it was interesting. I was listening to Russell Tompkins Jr. the other night, man. He was reflecting, he was lead singer stylist. He was talking about what Eddie Hendrix meant to him and what Eddie Holman really meant to him in terms of the falsetto sound, you see.
Yeah.
And how he was able to listen to every song, every note, and then take it in his own way with Tom Bell and Linda Creed and the others as the composers and just present something that was brand new. It's brand new. And that's the story of all the great artists, including yourself, my brother.
On,
including, I'm talking absolutely, indeed. And it's a beautiful thing, but also it's a lot of loneliness and a lot of solitude and a lot of suffering and a lot of wrestling with one's own inner demons. I mean, all of that goes hand in hand with wrestling with what it means to be human at the deepest level.
Well, we human beings are very lucky to have guiding voices like you, man, to not just guide us, but because you don't just guide us by giving us answers, you guide us by forcing questions. You're the greatest teacher. You're the greatest example of teaching because you don't display your wares. You cause us to think, and you cause us to ask the questions. And that's because when you do that, when you can create that in a human being, they have to ascertain for themselves what they think. And so you're the greatest example of teaching because you give us the thirst and the hunger to know what we want, to know what we are, to know where we come from, to know where we're going. So our lives are infinitely richer because of folks like yourself, Cornel.
Well, I think in both of our cases, we have just been so blessed to have such magnificent parents. You know, we are who we are because somebody loved us, our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles and others. And you think about our dear brother, George Floyd Jr., when he was being lynched and he called for his mother.
That's right.
Called for his mama. She's already made her way, but he's calling for her mother. You see, that is the deepest, most profound desire, to be able to have a home-like space in a homeless world. And his mother allowed him to feel safe and loved and affirmed in that way.
That's
overcome by overloving. And when you're overcome by overloving, then what is inside of you is a fire that the world can't ever put out.
That's correct.
And in fact, at the deepest level, the world can't even harm you. You could be a political prisoner, like my dear brother H. Rap Brown right now in Arizona. I just wrote a piece in his latest book, been in prison for 40. Mumi Abu Jamal, who we spend much time supporting. You see, that there's a sense in which those brothers are two of the freest brothers in the American empire, and yet both of them incarcerated because he got something that the world can't take away from him. They got the memories, They got a joy. Now, brother, now Imam, our dear brother, Imam Al-Hameen, I mean, he's a Muslim brother, so he's got a religious faith. Now, Mumi Abdul Jamal, of course, is a very profoundly spiritual brother, towering figure, but he's not religious the way Imam Al-Hameen is. You see, Jamil Abdullah Al-Hameen. But both of them have something the world can't take away. But that's at the center of music and at the center of the jazz tradition. Because once you have that experience of freedom and the foretaste of what an alternative reality is in light of the nightmares reality that you're going to have to come to terms with in your life, you never, ever want anybody to think they can take it away, no matter what, you see.
Yeah.
And that is one of the greatest experiences of any of us in space and time, you know?
Yeah.
It really is.
At times you glimpse that, you see that. I mean, I know that when we are doing what we're supposed to be doing, we are in the center of that will. You can glimpse that, and it's sometimes it's enough to get you, like you said, through those moments of doubt and weakness and struggling with your demons and you know, and the vicissitudes of a day-to-day assault on your
coming
humanity.
at your tooth and nail. I'm telling you. That's why I tell the young folk all the time. They say, stay woke, stay woke. I say, well, wait a minute now. You stay woke, you're going to suffer from amnesia. No, and insomnia. You're going to have to think. You're going to have to learn how to see and feel and love and be a long distance runner, which means you got to stay fortified. That's a little different than staying woke. You see, woke is the moment in your project of being fortified, you see.
Yeah, yeah.
And because you can wake up too quick and be so completely overwhelmed that you want to get back in your mama's womb again.
Right, right.
You can wake up and look around and see the nightmare and be paralyzed and be despairing and be despondent and be paralyzed by a certain kind of pessimism. I'm not against pessimism per se, because pessimism has certain truths in it. You just don't want the conclusion of pessimism to ever be cowardliness. To refuse to fight, to sell out, sell your soul for a mess of pottage, which is very popular these days because everybody's for sale and everything's for sale. So you got a whole lot of sellouts out there, or they cave in. So nothing wrong. I'm pessimistic. That's fine. You got a sense of reality. Now, how strong is your fight? Where's your bounce back? I want to know what your bounce back is. Right there.
I think some people are happy in their darkness too. I think some people love to watch the news and see the continuing onslaught, and that's the language they know. It's safer to be distressed and safer to be angry and safer to be hopeless than to actually, as you say, fortify yourself. It's safer certainly than to challenge yourself to action.
God, that's so true.
If you can look at and I sometimes struggle with this, Dr. West. I struggle with those folks who wear automatic weapons and Hawaiian shirts and who feel that the privilege of being alive is theirs and theirs alone, so they don't wear their masks, and they support policies and politics and partisan nonsense that is clearly and unabashedly anti-people of color, anti-progress, it's homophobic and Islamophobic and hateful, and so sometimes every now and then I have trouble understanding that, and it's very difficult to not feel anger towards those kinds of people, and even and I find that that's a struggle. That's a struggle to not yield to the part of you that would wish any kind of harm on any human being at all, because then you've yielded, you've given in to the demonic lie that hatred fights hatred, and that's such a you know. And so The thing is, I think that sometimes people get stuck in that anger. They get stuck in that dimension of fear and hatred and anger, and even they might be liberal or whatever.
Well, it cuts across political and ideological lines. I mean, the fascism, of course, in its organized form, is the most ugly and vicious. But I think there's a tendency in all human beings not to want to linger too long in the dark corners of their own soul. And some who do discover the dark corner of their own soul, they can become too obsessed with it. My brother, Cliff West, one of the deepest people I've ever known. I've been trying to catch up with him for a long time. But people who get addicted to a certain kind of grimness, they get addicted to a certain kind of misery, so that they can't break the back of that kind of addiction, just like somebody addicted in the crack house, addicted to alcoholism or whatever, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the one hand, you've got the dominant orientation in America, which is psychic regeneration through violence and conquest. That's how they conquered the nation. The dominant myth of the nation is the frontier. And the frontier is so-called civilized, so-called savages, and the civilized get psychic and moral regeneration through subordinating dispossession of land of precious indigenous peoples or Mexican peoples, whoever's land they own. They've got to take it, you see. And they feel good about that. Wave the flag. And so white supremacy is rooted in that.
Right.
Male supremacy is rooted in that. Transphobia, homophobia is rooted in that.
Yes, sir.
Trashing Arabs and Jews and Palestinians and Dalits and Roma, rooted in that. But then on the other hand, it's easy to fall into a self-righteousness when you think you woke.
Right.
And that can become dogmatic too. So you're still not jazz-like. You're going to still play in the military band rather than in Duke Ellington and Count Basie's band, where you got to raise your voice, not just play the notes that's on the page all the time, see? And so part of, I think, what jazz at its highest level was maturity. And actually, Brother Winton speaks about this with great insight, that it's about how do you become a mature human being that does not fall into any kind of orthodoxy, but still preserve your creativity and compassion. And then the willingness to be really risk driven. You got to be willing to take a risk.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a hard thing. Step out on nothing and land on something. You see, that's a different way of being in the world. And a lot of people hold on for safety, holding on to their idols, holding on to their commodities, holding on to their possessions, holding on to their skin color, holding on to their status, holding on to their neighborhood, all the little petty things of the world that tells you these are the sources of safety for your trek from womb to tomb. And then you grab them and you discover, lo and behold, they empty. They vacuum.
It's funny, man. That's deep. Orthodoxy is that's a heavy concept, man. The idea of knowing. I think to me it sounds like know thyself. To thyself be true.
Be true.
And the unexamined life is not worth living.
That's it. That's Socrates. Shakespeare and Socrates dipped in Cuba and dipped in the U.S. context, and it connects with all of the African wisdom that the great Maulana Karanga been teaching us all these years, and Haki Mahabuti and others teaching us all these years. The bridges that connect the human, beginning in Africa, and its relation to all the other civilizations. And then here we are in the Roman Empire with the thing about the collapse, ecological catastrophe.
While Nero fiddles, man.
Nero fiddles on the Titanic with Eric and Ahab.
Doing it right now.
Driver's seat, like Melville, Moby Dick. You got Ahab driving the Titanic. I'm telling you, man. Somebody sing a song.
On some level, man, you look at it and you can't help but like, wow, if it weren't so tragic, it would almost be entertaining, but it can never be entertaining because that means you bought into it.
That's true.
But if you look at it, it's just, wow, you can't imagine that it could have been this farcical, that you could not imagine there would be this unrelenting, you know, macabre reality that gets played out every day.
Every day. And
know?
then for Black people, though, in the history of America, when you got 244 years of the most barbaric slavery of modern times, and then another 100 years of neo-slavery, and then now the last 40 years of the new Jim Crow, with some spaces for the Black middle classes, but other than that, Black folk catching hell. America's always been a kind of Titanic.
Yeah.
It really has been. So the question becomes, okay, now you're on this Titanic. Now let's see how deep we're gonna love. Let's see how we're gonna laugh. Let's see how we're gonna learn how to be ourselves. You see, and you know, it's like, okay, now Blind Lemon Jefferson, play your song, brother. Let's hear what it sounds like. Aretha, let's hear what's on the inside of you. You see to me, and somehow we'll muster, overcoming through overloving. We're gonna muster the power. Wonderful phrase by August Wilson. He said, music is the spiritual fist of Black people. It's the spiritual fist in a war. How we gonna start swinging? It don't mean a thing if we ain't got that swing.
I was waiting for that. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing.
That swing. What kind of music, spiritual fist you gonna have? That's why the contemporary situation with the dumbing down of so much of the music of the young Black folk and young people around the world, it's a form of warfare against young people's souls.
Are you talking about auto-tune? You talking about auto-tune,
all the different, I'm talking about the industry, you're right, but the industry, the recording industry, the live industry. I mean, you know, just
disconnect numbers.
Them from the greatness, disconnect the young folk from the greatness of their own tradition and the greatness of their ancestors, the greatness of the ones who came before. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you're going to try to fight, but you got both of your fists behind you, and you're going to just swing with your shoulders. No, you got to learn how to be swinging. You see, that's what Coltrane's teaching you. That's exactly what Duke and them teaching you. That's right. What the miracles, that's what the Delphonics and the dramatics teaching us. You see, how we going to spiritually swing so that our fists are strong enough to sustain us. It's never been strong enough to fundamentally transform American empire.
Right.
No.
Well, there's
that's not.
Yeah.
You know, because
then there's Kendrick Lamar.
Oh, brother Kendrick. Oh, and Kamari Washington and the younger generation. They still coming now.
They're not. I don't see on any auto tune happening there. I don't see music by machine, music by formula ain't happening there.
Right.
None of
just the same old loops and things. Erykah Badu and Jill Scott. And, I mean, we've got some exemplars, but it is a very, in some ways, it's a sad situation in terms of how long will we have to suffer and acknowledge our relative defeat, even though our spirits are defeatless.
Right.
You see.
Well, see,
nothing can defeat our spirits, but we must acknowledge that when the masses of Black people, the masses of poor people, and others live lives of oppression, that we're not winning.
It's funny because
we're moving, but not winning.
It's funny because in this, maybe I'm wrong because I'm not an intellect like you, but man, sometimes I feel like the effects of profound societal change don't flower right away.
That's right.
I'm looking at music now and I'm going, where musicians and where they at with this. So I'm not thinking, yeah, okay. I want to know what happens 2 years from now, 3 years from now. I want to know whose lives are challenged. And right now it's such a, I mean, on the one hand, you want to give up, and on the other hand, you see people marching and you want to cry because it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. Yeah. And you see people reach out across ethnic, racial, sociological, ideological, political affiliation to stand up and march I mean, I find that this is one of the things that defines this moment, is that we're in the throes of the absolute lowest and the throes of the absolute highest.
Ooh, that's a beautiful way of putting it. That's a beautiful way of putting it.
And so you're kind of, you're sitting there, you're going, okay, this is now. What is going to surface? What's going to stay? What's going to happen in the voice of jazz, in the voice of young musicians, in the voice of young artists, in the voice of young people?
Right.
Because
that's real.
The crucible of this moment is powerful. This is just a fulcrum. It's but I think that I personally feel like we don't even understand what the repercussions. We're going to see some miraculous things take place. It's my honest, I'm not controlling this. It's not hopefulness. I'm just telling you, we're going to see some miraculous things take place, because we've been sitting in the seat of darkness for too long.
For much too long. Like you saying, we're seeing it already, on the streets, not just on the streets, but the kind of organizing that's taking place, coordinating, the wonderful multiracial solidarity that's different than this talk about white fragility. No, we're talking about integrity. We're talking about solidarity, people coming together no matter what color, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what national identity, because they're concerned about truth, they're concerned about justice.
Yes,
but it's inside of all of us too. It's like inside Tupac. You got the thug, you got the revolutionary.
Right.
You say you got certain orientations to dominate, orientations to serve and sacrifice.
What did they say? But what did they say about
what they say
about Jesus? Jesus didn't love the sin, but he loved the sinner.
That's exactly right. That's true. When he ran those mother huckers out of the temple, first thing he did when he got to Jerusalem, right? He went straight to the temple. And what was that temple? What did that represent? Wall Street, White House, the Pentagon, State Department, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Hollywood, all of it. That's what was in the temple. Yeah. He saw greed. He saw obsession with status. He ran them out because they were subordinating the poor and not focusing on the lives that poor people ought to live. Now, see, you don't see that particular act of Jesus. That's what's, of course, responsible for him being crucified. You don't see that act on the walls of churches.
No.
How many churches have you ever gone into and seen Jesus running out the folk from the temple? The money changers.
No, we like to keep Jesus on the cross, man. We like to keep Jesus in the 10 stations.
Little
the 10 stations, man.
Deodorized, looking like Michelangelo's uncle, like he's straight out of Italy rather than North.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I mean? Brown. So, no, that's Jesus too. Now, that takes us right back to Jazz in the Academy again. You see? Jesus is too deep and full of love and truth for most churches. Just like jazz is full of too much truth and love for the academy. But we got some. I mean, we got some wonderful jazz scholars, and we thank God for that. We're talking about Robin, we're talking about Sister Ingrid and others. But the Dwight Andrews, we can go on and on. We got some wonderful, wonderful professors, yourself and what have you. But you know and I know that the deep spirit of jazz, if it was unleashed in the academy, man, most of the professors be running out of there like the money changers at a temple.
I walk into my classes on the first day of class and I look at them and I go, listen, man, if I did my gig correctly, y'all be asking more questions than ever. Ooh, I have given you no information. In fact, if I've done my job correctly, I've confused you and led you astray so that you question me and so that you question what you believe jazz is. Because I bet, and they look at you like, oh, man, Professor, you're scaring me. No, I'm not scaring you, man. I'm telling you what it is. This thing we call jazz is sacred. It's sacred to me, and you cannot keep it in a building or a concert hall.
Absolutely.
Because it's the biggest thing I know. And so for me, it's
absolutely.
And if I
and
ever
you tell them too, you see, You can play in it, but don't play with it. This ain't no game. This ain't
it's
no
a big
puzzle.
sandbox. It's a big sandbox. It's infinite.
You really are. So you're gonna learn how to play and laugh, but it's gonna be within the tradition. You see, but if you just from the outside trying to manipulate it to make sure your career is such that people think you X and Y, then no, you need to go to the marketplace and just stay there. Jazz is deeper than the marketplace. It's got to go through the marketplace. Jazz musicians need to eat and so forth and so on, but they don't stay there. They in it, but not of it. They working through it because something bigger than them. See, and that's what goes back to Miles talking about Louis Armstrong and Charlie Parker. Yeah. Both of them did what? They gave every fiber of their being and all of their genius and laughter and all of their faults and foibles to something bigger than them. What came through their horns.
Yes,
came through their horns, you know, in relation to the other horn players and singers and audience whose lives can actually become jazz-like if they have the courage to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
What a blessing, what an honor, what a privilege to be here with my dear brother Arturo O'Farrill with the Afro Latin Jazz Orchestra. We keep alive a tradition of tremendous nobility and unbelievable royalty. I'm talking about Chico O'Farrill and Dizzy Gillespie. I'm talking about James Brown and Tito Puente. I'm talking about Aretha Franklin and Celia Cruz. It's a caravan of love in the language of the Isley Brothers, or what John Coltrane called a love supreme.
What is more important than the groove on the 53rd anniversary of the death of John Coltrane? There's my mama, my loved ones. But in the end, the funk and the groove ain't got nothing more important, because it's about the love. Unadulterated, unstoppable love.